Hi, I'm Dongshang. Welcome to Digging into China, where we explore China in depth to reveal unique perspectives. Recently, as the U.S. China trade war has begun, there has been a surge of online analysis. However, most of these discussions adopted a broad macroeconomic perspective, debating which nation might emerge victorious. Few explore this issue from the viewpoint of ordinary individuals. In this episode, we will shift our focus to the ground level, examining how the U.S.-China trade war could impact everyday Chinese citizens and identifying the concerns we should have as this conflict unfolds. The primary concern for many regarding the trade war is likely the potential for job losses resulting from economic decoupling between the U.S. and China. A CNBC report indicates that from April 1st to April 8th, the first week the trade war took effect, China's exports to the U.S. plummeted by 64% compared to the prior week, rapidly approaching zero. If China's exports to the U.S. were to cease entirely, would this trigger a wave of unemployment in China? And how many jobs are actually tied to these exports? In mainland China, a common belief is that even if exports to the U.S. dropped to zero, the impact would be minimal. The reasoning hinges on the fact that China's exports to the U.S. constitute a small portion of its GDP, just 2.78%, or approximately $524.6 billion. Compared to other nations, this figure is modest. For instance, Vietnam's exports to the U.S. account for 30% of its GDP, making China's share seem negligible by comparison. Many thus conclude that a complete halt in U.S.-China trade would result in a loss of just over 2% of GDP, a manageable setback. However, this perspective significantly underestimates the trade war's potential impact on China. First, it fails to account for the true scale of China's exports to the U.S. In 2024, China reported $524.6 billion in exports to the U.S., but this figure does not tell the whole story. It is widely understood that following the previous U.S.-China trade war and the imposition of U.S. tariffs, China expanded its use of transshipment trade. This involves routing goods through third countries to evade tariffs. For example, since the 2018 trade war, Vietnam's export to the U.S. have surged, and China's exports to Vietnam have followed a similar trajectory. The parallel growth in these trade flows strongly suggests transshipment. A similar pattern has emerged with Mexico, albeit starting later, around 2020. China's transshipment activities are primarily concentrated in Southeast Asia, including countries like Thailand and Malaysia. While the exact volume of transshipped goods is unclear, 2024 trade data suggests Vietnam alone facilitated approximately $100 billion in transshipments for China, equivalent to 20% of China's direct exports to the U.S. Precise data on transshipment is scarce, as it operates in the legal gray area that contravenes U.S. regulations. Nevertheless, estimates from major investment banks indicated that, including transshipments, China's actual exports to the U.S. likely range between $700 billion and $1 trillion, far exceeding the official $524.6 billion. Beyond underestimating trade volumes, another overlooked factor is the multiplier effect of exports on employment. Even if exports to the U.S. account for just 2% of GDP, this does not mean they support only 2% of jobs. To illustrate, consider Foxconn. A worker in a Foxconn factory producing iPhones for the U.S. market is one export-related employee, only one. However, Foxconn requires truck drivers to transport its products, and those workers need services like Internet Cafe, which employ staff. Constructing Foxconn's factories demands construction workers, and the nearby restaurants serving factory workers need cooks and servers. These roles, truck drivers, cafe staff, construction workers, and the restaurant employees, are all created indirectly by that single export job. This is the multiplier effect. Foxconn claims that a factory employing 300,000 workers can generate over 1 million local jobs, implying a multiplier effect exceeding 3. While Foxconn's claim may be overstated, academic research typically estimates the multiplier effect for China's export sector at half to 0.7, meaning one export worker supports 1.5 to 1.7 jobs. This is high globally, reflecting China's economy being heavily oriented towards trade. Its high-speed rail and the railway system exist to transport low-cost labor from rural areas to cities. Its extensive highway facilitate the rapid goods transport, and its robust power infrastructure supports factory operations. Given this multiplier effect, how many jobs in China are tied to exports and their related industries? According to China's Ministry of Commerce, in 2022, exports supported 180 million jobs. Using this figure and the proportion of exports to the U.S., approximately 30 million jobs are linked to U.S. exports, even without accounting for transshipments. Including transshipments, the number rises to between 40 and 60 million. Some may argue that losing a few tens of millions of jobs is manageable, given China's large population. However, this overlooks another critical issue, China's actual employment landscape. By actual employment, I mean not just whether official data is accurate, though some inaccuracies likely exist, but the distinction between urban and the rural jobs. For those working in export-oriented manufacturing, what is their socio-economic status in China? Many may view factory jobs as low-end and undesirable due to long hours and grueling conditions. Yet, nearly half of China's population earns less than 3,000 yuan per month, or roughly $411. Former Premier Li Keqiang noted that 600 million Chinese fall below this threshold, a figure that surprises many but is largely due to the oversight of rural workers. Rural residents in China have low incomes with an average annual disposable income of 23,119 yuan, less than 2,000 yuan monthly. Rural workers are numerous. Of China's 730 million total workforce, 260 million are rural and 470 million are urban. Most rural workers are farmers, a role not traditionally counted as a job. Thus, when assessing employment, we should focus on the 470 million urban workers, as the trade war-related job losses primarily affect this group. Using 470 million as the baseline, losing 30 million jobs equates to a 6.3% reduction in urban employment. Losing 60 million jobs would mean a 12.6% reduction. Thus, if exports to the U.S. ceases, the employment impact is far greater than commonly assumed, particularly in today's economic context. Even before the trade war intensified, China faced employment challenges. This year's job market appears even more daunting. Bloomberg reports that starting in January 2025, job numbers have noticeably declined. Additionally, this year's 12.22 million college graduates represents a record high. Combined, these factors make youth unemployment particularly dire, with the graduating students facing unprecedented challenges. The fallout extends beyond the job losses and unemployment. It also pressures existing jobs. With more job seekers than available positions, workers' bargaining power diminishes. Employers can say, hey, if you don't want the job, others will. This harsh reality not only increases unemployment and depresses wages, but also contributes to broader issues like reverse urbanization and the related social challenges affecting society at large. China's export industry is concentrated in the prosperous southeast coastal regions, where reliance on U.S. exports far exceeds the national average of 2.78% of GDP. In Guangzhou, U.S. exports account for 6.7% of GDP. In Zhejiang, over 7%. Shanghai, Fujian, and Jiangsu exceed 4%, all significantly above the national figure. These regions will bear a disproportionate brunt of the trade war's impact. A wave of unemployment is likely to emerge in these coastal areas, potentially triggering reverse urbanization as migrant workers return to their hometowns. Coastal regions have high living costs, and without sufficient jobs, many will return to their places of origin. Such mass returns are rare in China's history. They occurred in 2008 during the global financial crisis, when a trade collapse left 15 million migrant workers jobless, and in the 1970s post-cultural revolution, when urban youths were sent back from rural areas back to the cities. Both instances led to sharp increases in crime. In 2009, criminal cases rose 20% compared to 2007, and the post-cultural revolution, public safety deteriorated significantly, prompting a nationwide crackdown. Unemployed individuals returning to hometowns with few job prospects often contribute to rising crime rates. While the negative impacts of U.S.-China trade decoupling are significant, the consequences of zero U.S. exports will not manifest immediately. The trade war's onset does not mean exports and related jobs vanish overnight. The impact unfolds gradually. A key distinction is that the U.S. feels the trade war's effect primarily on the consumer side, while China feels them on the business side. In the U.S., higher prices, particularly for consumer goods, affect ordinary people immediately. In China, businesses bear the initial brunt, as China imports little from the U.S., delaying the impact on individuals. Facing high U.S. tariffs, Chinese businesses may not halt production immediately, but instead seek alternatives such as transshipping through Vietnam, especially as the U.S. tariffs on Vietnam are currently paused. If transshipment routes close, factories will seek other buyers, both domestic and international, only ceasing production when all options are exhausted. Only then will the full unemployment impact emerge. Factories represent significant investments, incentivizing owners to maintain production, which delays unemployment. Thus, in this trade war, the U.S. may feel immediate consumer pain but could adapt through alternative supply chains, while China may experience a delayed but intensifying impact, akin to a slow boil. These projections assume the trade war's current trajectory and partial decoupling. They do not account for scenarios where China faces global isolation, with countries like Vietnam and the EU also refusing imports. In such a case, job losses could reach 180 million, not just 30 or 60 million. Even non-manufacturing sectors like technology may not be safe. Recent U.S. proposals to delist Chinese internet companies from U.S. stock exchanges could devastate China's tech industry. For example, Douyu, a live streaming platform, reported net profits of negative 580 million yuan, negative 70 million yuan, positive 35 million yuan, and a negative 300 million yuan over 4 years. Its survival relies on U.S. stock market access for fundraising, not profits. Delisting could jeopardize such companies, eliminating tech jobs rapidly. Companies listed on both U.S. and Hong Kong exchanges like JD.com may fare better, but would still face reduced liquidity and failing stock prices, impacting job creation. Additional risks such as foreign capital withdrawal and financial sector impacts are uncertain and depend on the trade war's progression. If it continues, effects will extend beyond manufacturing. While these challenges could lower living standards, they are unlikely to destroy China, whether 30 or 70 or 60 million jobs are lost. China can endure, and 180 million job losses are likely beyond the current U.S. capabilities. However, a more profound risk looms, one not tied to external actors like the U.S., but to the action of the Chinese Communist Party. This is the true concern. Some may fear CCP could escalate tensions, perhaps over Taiwan, if it feels globally cornered, yet my concern lies elsewhere. Historically, the CCP's greatest harm has often been inflicted on its own citizens, not external adversaries. We must be vigilant about the CCP resorting to campaign-style policies. A review of its history reveals a regime ill-equipped to address complex challenges rationally. Its solutions frequently devolve into campaigns that exacerbate the original problem. The Cultural Revolution exemplifies this, but the recent zero-COVID policy is a closer example. Once the central government prioritized zero cases, all other activities were sidelined. Health codes were mandatory, and a single case could lock down families, neighborhoods, or cities. Ultimately, the virus harm was overshadowed by the policy's broader damage. The CCP's mantra of concentrating resources for great achievements often results in significant missteps, as history repeatedly demonstrates. The tendency stems from the CCP's top-down centralized structure, which issues rigid directives with little flexibility. The zero-COVID mandate demanded relentless enforcement, leading to severe consequences. The greatest concern now is how the CCP will respond as the trade war causes GDP growth to falter, exports to decline, and unemployment to rise. A new campaign-style initiative could emerge, which is what we should fear most. To address issues like weak consumption, deflation, or falling exports, the CCP might launch a campaign reminiscent of zero-COVID. To stimulate spending, could we see a consumption code requiring monthly purchases to leave home? To boost employment, a mandatory employment code restricting access to services without a job? Businesses might face pressure to maintain production through excessive loans, potentially at zero interest or even mandatory borrowing. These are merely surface-level possibilities. The CCP's ingenuity in such campaigns often surpasses imagination, as seen with health codes and spatial-temporal companions during the pandemic, concepts that seemed almost fantastical. In campaign mode, the CCP's methods of imposing hardship will likely exceed our expectations, posing a risk greater than the trade war itself. The CCP has yet to outline its trade war strategy clearly, necessitating caution. Many may hope for policies like tax cuts or stimulus to navigate the trade war's challenges, viewing the CCP as a potential savior. However, the CCP has rarely been a savior for the Chinese people. Its restraint from adding to citizens' burdens would already be cause for gratitude. We must remain highly alert to its next moves, as they could deepen the trade war's pain, potentially becoming the primary source of suffering, surpassing the trade war's direct impacts. The CCP often remains dormant until it acts, at which point the challenges for the Chinese people frequently arise. China's recent progress stemmed not from CCP's action but from its relative inaction, allowing organic growth. We must now guard against the CCP becoming proactive in response to the trade war, as such actions could precipitate China's greatest challenges. Thank you so much for watching. If you find this video helpful, please like it, drop a comment below, and hit the subscribe button right here. It really helps YouTube suggest my video to others. I'll be back with more content soon. Until then,